Hi guys, welcome back to Center Stage. If you haven't seen my previous video about the Broadway history overview, I would highly suggest that you go and watch that. But moving on, today's episode is going to look at Laura Keene. Now the year would be 1857. This is pretty much the best place to start with Broadway. Broadway wasn't really Broadway yet, but 1857 is probably the best year to start. Now, in order to talk about one of Broadway's earliest musical playwrights, Laura Keene, we have to pretty much peel away what history tells us. And what history tells us is the Elves debuted in 1857 inside a newly built theater named Laura Keene's Theater. Laura actually started her life as Mary Frances Moss in 1826. After the imprisonment and the exile of her husband in Australia, she wanted to basically reinvent herself and live an independent life. In order to care for herself and her two daughters, she ended up deciding to pursue a life on stage. Although acting at that time wasn't considered a respectable profession, she still decided to completely change her identity and become Laura Keene. Well, where does one start performing in 1851? For Laura, it came on the southwest side of London, in an area known as Richmond, where she would eventually debut as Juliet in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Fast forward a year, Laura ends up catching the attention of American actor and theater manager James Wallach. Now, James ended up inviting her to be the leading actress in his theater, aptly named Wallach's Theater, across the pond back in New York City. Now, Laura was described by the New York Daily Mirror, which was New York's morning newspaper, as having a natural style, an admirable articulation, and a winning voice. She would quickly gain popularity in the U.S. and was able to afford bringing her mother and her two daughters over from London. Now, it was around this time when she would end up meeting John Lutz. Now, John would eventually become her business partner and her husband when they would marry in 1857. Now, with Laura's success as an actress, she wanted to pursue an even bigger dream as a theater manager. Although it was practically unheard of for a woman to manage a theater, she decided to take the risk and open the Charles Street Theater in Baltimore, Maryland. It was on that day in 1853, the day before Christmas, that Laura Keene and Catherine Sinclair would become the first female theater managers in the U.S., with Catherine opening the Metropolitan Theater in California. With the success both women had as theater managers, Laura would eventually move out to California to sign a contract with the Metropolitan Theater for almost $30,000 a year, which in today's money would equal to a little over $1 billion. While acting at the Metropolitan, Laura would meet actor Edwin Booth. Laura would eventually perform in many productions with Edwin, even traveling on tour with him in Australia, where audiences flocked in droves to catch a glimpse of the pair on stage. Now, during the financial depression of 1855, Laura worked very tirelessly to help revitalize the theaters around the Metropolitan before heading back to New York City. It was then that Laura, 30 years old, and her husband John Lutz, with the support of her friends, actors, and investors, built a theater appropriately named Laura Keene's Theater. The theater would prove to be an extremely successful venture, with Laura not only playing the lead in all her shows, but also writing the plays, helping design the sets and costumes, and directing with her immense theatrical knowledge and creativity. In 1857, Laura ended up writing a show called The Elves, which, as we know from the previous video, the show ran for 50 performances, making it at that time the first production to have a long run. While not much information exists on this musical, we do know that The Elves proved to be a very successful show for the writer, costume designer, set designer, and of course, theater manager, Laura Keene. So, what happened to Laura? Well, Laura would go on to publish an art lecture circuit about the fine arts, until, unfortunately, suffering a stroke in July of 1873. With her conditioning worsening, She would later die in November at her home in Montclair, New Jersey, at the age of 47. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to today's video. If you enjoyed this, please comment on what you liked or disliked. I'd love to hear from you. And if you want to see other videos like this, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. And until next time, that's a wrap.